Hey everyone! Okay, so today I want to share with you my the books I read for Women in Translation Month, which was August, and I mostly just read these during the last week of August, which was the Women in Translation Readathon. You can check out my TBR if you want to hear all the books that I really wanted to get to. I only got to 3 of them, and I'm actually going to start off by saying that this little bit right now I am refilming. So we'll jump to like the last 2 books, which might be brighter because I did them earlier in the day. And so this is like a mashed up video that I'm just gonna be glad to finally get up. But anyway, let's start with the first book, The Elegance, or The Enlightenment of the Greengage Tree by Shokoofej Azar. This is a story about the decade following the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and it follows a family of 5 and sort of the aftermath of that revolution, the way that this family reacts to it, the way that the war impacted their lives, the way that they're coping with the trauma of the war. This book is told in the style of magical realism. Magical realism in this book feels not like this fantastical sort of fun element that the author brings in. It feels like the manifestation of the inability to cope with reality in a severely traumatized mind. And using magical realism in that way, in the context of a family that is clearly traumatized and reacting and finding their way to adjust to a new reality, works so well. It is using this style which blurs reality with the fantastical as a way to mirror the ever-changing social and political, every dynamic of this new world post-revolution. Living through a war or some sort of traumatizing event as like a collective society, you have all these changing of standards and expectations and what is acceptable, especially a revolution of ideas like the Islamic Revolution, where certain behaviors or certain dress or certain ideas were previously tolerated no longer are. And that doesn't happen overnight. Like, it's an evolution of events as you find a new standard for like what is allowed in a society. It's a shifting mark, and it's a readjustment to a different reality. And so I felt the author used magical realism in that way to mirror how these individuals were living in a new reality, one that they didn't know what the perimeters of their reality was. They didn't know what to trust. They didn't know who to trust. They didn't know how to adjust to this new standard where things that used to be okay were no longer okay, and they're like different things that are expected of you and tolerated. And I just felt like that was fantastic, and it was so beautifully done as well. There were so many times that I felt like this book was amazing. Honestly, I really, really liked it. I think that it was one of those books that like sort of disarmed me in a way that I didn't know what to think almost the whole time while I was reading it, and I finished it. And like, then once I had finished it, I knew that I liked it. Which those books are kind of rare to come across in my experience, and they're ones that sort of immediately evoke the desire to reread them, because it feels like you were just sort of like getting things, like you were one step behind the whole way through, and you get to the end and you're like, oh, I get it. Like, now I understand how I'm supposed to read this book, how I'm supposed to relate to it or think about it. So this is definitely one that I enjoyed and I would recommend, and I would look forward to reading again. I thought this was really quite an accomplishment, and I'm not all surprised that it was shortlisted for the Booker International, right? That's what it's called. And I have only read one other book on that list, but like, I think, well, I guess I can't say that because I haven't read all of them, but like, this book was really amazing. This book was really, really good. Anyway, so now we're gonna jump back in time and you'll see the other books that I read. So now I have my last 2 books that I'm going to share with you now. So obviously, The Elegance of the Hedgehog by Muriel Barbery. I didn't really like this book very much. I ended up being kind of really surprised. Like, surprised in how much I didn't get on with it. Yeah, the main characters, Renee is a concierge and Paloma is a 14-year-old girl who is has very rich parents, but she is very disenchanted with the world and planning to commit suicide. They're both in the same building, in the same apartment building. They both just see themselves as being surrounded by really pretentious and self-absorbed people, but yet I found them to be the most pretentious and self-absorbed characters. And it's all very like pseudo-philosophical. There are a lot of like philosophical essays that just kind of didn't really hit the mark for me. Like they just kind of didn't work. And then there's another character, Mr. Ozu, who comes like 2/3 of the way through the book, and with him we start to get a bit of plot. In the end, I didn't really get where it was going. I didn't like the characters. I didn't feel invested in any of them. The characters spend so much time inside their own heads that at the end of the book, when we're meant to like feel emotion and feel invested in the relationships between different characters, that felt so unearned to me. And there are a few things at the end that just felt like the author was cashing in on sentimentality and like emotional manipulation in a way that I like couldn't believe that they like were trying to get away with this. It really didn't work for me. Like there was a part I know I was supposed to be crying, and I was just laughing because I couldn't believe the author thought that that would have worked. But yet this book has really good reviews, so I guess it worked. Like honestly, I finished this book feeling like it was a song played out of tune for me, or like when you're playing a song on the piano and you get like you're just slightly off, like your keys are off. And so it sounds like it should be like, it should work, but actually you're just like all a key off. You're too far up, whatever. I don't actually play the piano, so that's not a good analogy. But the point is like, it felt like it should have worked, but it also like just like really, really didn't for me. I feel like I could sort of see us like an impression of what the author was going for and why this might have worked for some other readers, but the sentimentality was just out of tone for me. The characters were not lovable, and I didn't feel that the author quite communicated if we were supposed to be viewing them in a different way. Like there was a moment where I thought, I wondered if I was supposed to be reading this more like A Man Called Ove, which is a book that I did really enjoy. But at the beginning of the book, I found Ove, the main character, like really unlikable because he's just this grumpy man and is like just complaining about everything. And then you realize like, oh, he's just a grumpy man and he's just gonna complain about everything, but you just kind of like smile at him and you're like, oh, grandpa, that kind of a thing. But so like there's a point in the book where I was like, oh, so maybe I'm not supposed to be taking this so seriously. But the characters are always taking themselves so seriously, and the end of the book feels like you're meant to be taking it all very seriously. Like these are not ironic characters. These are not ironic relationships. Like you're supposed to be really invested in them. And so I don't know, like honestly, maybe I'm just missing something. And if you love this book, like please feel free to share with me why you loved it. It ended up just really not working for me. I don't think there's anything wrong if it worked for you, but it didn't work for me. I think I will probably completely forget that I even read this book within like a week or two. So I gave it 2 stars, and that might seem harsh, but that's like really how I felt about the book when I finished it. So I'm sorry that one was such a dud, but the next book I have, or that I finished, is The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. And this one is, I'm sure you've probably heard before, but this is a book about an island where there's a totalitarian government and things disappear, and after things disappear, no one can remember them, and there's a memory police to enforce this. There are actually like people hiding in the society who can still remember things. And we have a main character, she doesn't have a name, an old man called Old Man, her editor, who we also get to know, and that's pretty much it. The plot revolves around these 3 characters, their life surviving in this society. The interesting thing about this book to me was that it was a very micro rather than macro view on this kind of like futuristic, dystopian, totalitarian society experience, right? It was more concerned with the psychology of these characters and the psychology of individuals which make up a society, concerned with the trees rather than the forest is what I'm saying. And I found that interesting, especially considering the fact that because this book was called Orwellian, and I think that when I heard someone talk about this before, I feel like they had suggested reading 1984 first. And so I had been meaning to read 1984 for a long time, and I picked it up and read it right before I read this book. So I finished 1984 and then read this book immediately afterwards. And I think that I don't wish that I didn't do that, but I think it was somewhat impossible for me to read this book without putting it in conversation with 1984, which has obviously really influenced the author and the story. 1984, for example, I would consider having been more concerned with the logistics of the government and the how and why a society and a government power like that would create that kind of a world. And this story was not concerned with those questions. It was concerned with more the psychology. And yet in the end, I felt like it answered the question of how a government, like a totalitarian government, could be successful creating a society like this a lot better than 1984 did, which was very interesting to me because it felt like a less overtly obvious objective of the author. Anyway, my favorite part in this book was definitely the main character, who is an author, her novel that she's writing, and we read sections of it. And like I said, this book is obviously in my head in conversation with 1984, which also has a part where we get a book read to us by one of the characters inside of the book. And so you just have like this book inside of a book. And that one is not done well, in my opinion. It's just like, oh, surprise. Very inelegantly, all of a sudden we are reading a textbook. But in here, the use of that story inside of a story is actually very well done and enhances the complexity of the ideas that the author is playing with so much. I felt like it added so much dimension, and it was the best part of this whole book, I thought. In the end, I think I gave this book 3 stars, which the reasons why are heavily like personal because of me. I'm realizing that I don't actually care very much for dystopian novels or like stories. I'm still gonna try reading more of them, and like that's not fixed in stone, but I found I don't tend to care very much about them. It's very hard for me to feel invested in them and to feel invested in the characters. And so I think that's why I gave this book such a low rating, is because in the end, I don't think it ended up appealing to me very much, or my caring about the individual characters very much. But I did think it was a good idea, and I thought the author played with the idea really well. I just didn't end up caring about it very much. And I can't pinpoint exactly what like the author should have done differently. I think it was just sort of a matter of personal preference and taste. I did feel a little bit surprised that this book, like the writing style and like the quality of writing didn't feel exceptionally impressive. I didn't have anything to complain about, but if I had read this book independent of the knowledge that had been shortlisted for the Booker International Prize, I would have been quite surprised to hear that, actually. I shouldn't think it was that exceptional. So anyway, again, like if you also read this and you have thoughts, I'd love to hear them. I ended up, I don't know, being surprised how apathetic I felt about this novel as well. And I mean, on a happy note, I've started another book that I don't feel apathetic about. So I was worried for a minute reading The Memory Police and then The Elegance of the Hedgehog, and feeling apathetic about 2 books in a row that I was going into a reading slump. But I'm reading Exciting Times right now, and I really like it. So that's good news for me. I was getting really worried, like right before it would be a bad time to get into a reading slump, let's say that. So anyway, I think that's it for this video. Sorry for the disorderliness of my, I don't know. Thanks for watching, and say hi in the comments, and I'll see you guys in another video. Bye!